Hi everyone, welcome to Teen Craft Tuesdays. Today we're going to talk about making shrink plastic charms, or you may know them by the name Shrinky Dinks. Your take and make kit, if you picked it up at the library, should include a keychain, a zipper pull, adhesive magnets, necklace cord, a jump ring, which is like just a single ring to connect like a charm to a key ring. Shrink plastic, about, I want to say it's like roughly 5 by 8 or 5 by 7 inches, parchment paper, and some instructions. Supplies that you will need to provide are a pair of sharp scissors, colored pencils or permanent markers like Sharpies if you have them, a hole punch, permission from a parent or guardian to use your oven, a baking sheet like a cookie sheet, something long and flat like that you can put in the oven, an oven mitts, and then you may want or need a pair of pliers to assemble your keychain or your necklace if you're going to put a jump ring on. So here are some ideas of things that you can use Shrinky Dink or shrink plastic to make. These are just some examples I saw. So people have made, excuse me, zipper pulls for their jackets or keychains or necklaces. So like down here, if you look at the necklace, this is a jump ring that is what is attached to the charm that then gives you a loop to string your necklace through. I didn't include earring hooks, but if you have fish hook earring hooks, you can make earrings out of your charms. I think these were magnets that I found. If you like to knit, a lot of knitters use stitch markers. That's another thing that I saw online that was pretty cool. So there's a lot of different things you can make out of them. A couple things I learned. I haven't done Shrinky Dinks for a very, very long time. So I made some samples to practice and kind of make sure everything worked properly. The one difference with my plastic than yours was I had white opaque shrink plastic, and I think yours is a kind of a clear or semi-transparent, so that'll be a little different. So one of the things you have to think about if you're going to make something other than a magnet is where your hole is going to be placed in your charm. So keep that in mind prior to choosing a design. Limit sharp corners and tight spaces. So this is a really perfect example of maybe not such a good choice. I honestly, I don't know what I'm going to use it for. It's really sharp, like the edges of the bird's tail. This is actually the end of a needle in the marker bled, and it gets darker as you bake it. And that is almost the size of an actual needle once it's shrunk, if that gives you any idea. So it's hard to cut out because shrink plastic's kind of, it has a tendency to be brittle, and kind of, if you cut into it, that might be enough to, rip further into the plastic. So tight corners are rough. And because I didn't really think this design through, the thread, I had to actually kind of cut around the background and leave some of it white because there wasn't an easy way to get in there to cut around it. So kind of keep that in mind. You can, if you have like a craft blade, you could try and cut through that prior to baking it, but it's not simple, and it doesn't make for a really useful end design because this one was it has a lot of sharp edges. So kind of avoid that. And really, really thin pieces. So if you're gonna if you're gonna draw something like this, is a regular Sharpie line that once it's shrunk is almost like dental floss. So if you're gonna try and cut around that on either side of that line, that's gonna be pretty thin, just like the tip of this needle when you finish your design. And it's done baking. So just kind of keep those things in mind as you're choosing a design. Your colors are going to be darker after they bake. I don't know why, but it has something to do with the way the color concentrates as it shrinks. So this outline of Arizona I made for my niece was actually originally the color of sand, and now it's like an orangey color. So that's something to think about as well. The other thing I noticed when I used Sharpies for this is I did a black outline and it was dry to the touch. And then I colored the inside in, and I noticed as I went close to the edges where there was black Sharpie, the color wanted to blend together because on the plastic, it goes into like the grooves and the texture in the plastic, and there are places where it's not fully dry and it will start to bleed together. So also keep that in mind as you're um, designing, choosing your design as you're coloring it, that's a possibility. So like on the previous slide, this is the same thing. This is the same color. It looks actually a little bit more like sand on this one, but like the spool for the thread, this top part here and down here, that was actually brown, and now it's like black. It's almost impossible to see the detail there. So something to kind of keep in mind as well. Ink stamps work really great for graphics, especially if they're fairly large stamps, considering they're going to shrink quite a bit. In my case, all of my samples that are in color, like this state one and the previous slide, started at about 4.5 inches tall, like at the longest point. So from here to here was about 4.5 inches before I baked them. After I baked my shrink plastic, this keychain is just under 2 inches. So it shrinks pretty significantly. So when you're ready to start your design, what you want to do is you want to draw and color your design, cut out the outside of the design, again, try and avoid those sharp corners if you can, and make sure you punch a hole before you bake it, because that hole is going to shrink dramatically, and the plastic gets thicker when it shrinks, so it will not be something you'll be able to punch after it shrinks. But it'll be about the right size. If you use a regular hole punch, it'll be about the right size for jewelry or keychains when it gets done shrinking. If you're not going to do something that requires stringing, like you're going to do a magnet, you don't need to punch a hole in it at all. What you want to do is preheat your oven. Once you get permission to use the oven, preheat your oven to 325 degrees. You do want it to be at full temperature before you put these in, so you can time appropriately when they're done. And then what you're going to do is take a baking sheet or a cookie sheet and put that parchment paper on it. And then you're going to put your design on top of the parchment paper. And in this case, just that gives you kind of an idea of the scale, that this is like a normal size cookie sheet, and look how big these states were, and they were less than half of their size when they were finished baking. Once they're ready to go in, you're going to put them in the oven on the baking sheet with the parchment paper underneath it for 3 minutes. And I would stay close and keep an eye on it, especially if you're doing something, like if you're trying to do something really long and narrow, shrink plastic can kind of curl on itself. And if it curls while it's baking and you don't catch it, it will actually meld the plastic together and you won't be able to unroll it, because it does come out pretty hard when it's done. So you want to keep an eye on it. One way to reduce the curling, where at least it won't curl and get stuck to another part of itself, is to fold your parchment paper over the top of your design. So in my case, because I had a number of designs on here, I actually took another piece of parchment paper that was this size as well and put it on top of my designs as they baked. So I couldn't really see how they were shrinking, but I could see that they weren't curling on themselves. The other thing when it's in the oven to keep in mind is if it does start to curl, if you take like a metal utensil, like a butter knife, and just try and kind of bend it back to where it should be while it's on the cookie sheet and it's still warm, you can uncurl it if you catch it. There is going to be some warping. You'll see that the plastic tends to get kind of wavy as it bakes, and that's normal. That'll tell you whether it's done or not, because once it stops waving and starts to lay flat on the cookie sheet, then you know that it's finished. So if it's still a little bit wavy, you can leave it in a bit longer. Just keep an eye on it. And then once you take it out, make sure you use oven mitts. It's going to be hot. Let your charms cool quite a bit, because again, those are also going to be quite hot. And then you end up with finished charms that you can use with what we provided for like a zipper pull like this, or a keychain. I think we provided a necklace cord also, so you could put the jump ring on here and then attach it to a necklace, or stick the magnet to the back of it. And again, we talked about this, about, it will get wavy as it shrinks. That's normal. Just wait till it flattens itself out. But if it curls onto itself, gently use a metal utensil to uncurl it. And you can reduce that by putting like your piece of parchment paper, if you fold it in half and put your design kind of sandwich between a top and a bottom layer of parchment paper on the sheet, it will be less likely to curl up on itself. So thanks for joining us today for Teen Craft Tuesdays. This is our last Teen Craft Tuesdays of the summer. We will be doing some more Teen Craft and virtual programming coming up this fall. Next week begins our back to school bingo, and each week we will make available on the Monday of that week, or starting the Monday of that week, the bingo card online, so you can download it from our site or you can pick it up at the library. And what you do is you do the activities on the bingo sheet. If you get 2 bingos that week, you could come in and spin the wheel to win school supplies. So we'll have 3 weeks of that happening leading up to the beginning of school. Thanks for joining us.